All right. So I can only see Kat, but Akua is with us. We now have a quorum.
We have quorum. Akua is on as well.
Okay, great. So I'll call the meeting to order. It's 6:02. Nice to see everyone. Up first is our consent agenda. We have our prior minutes from the September 25th meeting, as well as a number of policies, first read policies. Any discussion from the board on those? Questions? So I'll make a motion to accept the consent agenda. We'll do that by roll. Kat? I think you're muted, Kat.
Aye.
Great. Akua?
Aye.
Sarah?
Aye.
And Mary is an aye. Lynn, any need to reprioritize the flow of the meeting?
No, but I'm gonna ask that, Leah doesn't generally come to these meetings anymore, that she does her presentation stays if she wishes, but she also can, after she does her spotlight.
Of course. Yeah, no problem, of course.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have our public comment window. It looks like we have one person in the virtual world, Emily, and both of you are hoping to speak this evening? Okay, so just to let everyone know how I tend to run public comment is give you 2-3 minutes to speak to the board, read materials if you brought materials to read. Don't really do too much of a question and answer, but this is the opportunity to let the board hear your concerns, issues, questions. And then if further action is needed, we follow up from there. So Emily, I'll start with you.
Sure, thank you.
Welcome.
I'm gonna turn off my volume because there's a terrible echo here. Okay, I have a question about the STEPS program. And I understand it's not necessarily a question and answer, so I guess I'll just state the concern. My daughter was part of the 8th grade at Berkshire that has had behavioral issues from the time they were in kindergarten. Before Lenny Badeau left, he put the classes back together. They had been split, and it was too much for her, and now I take her to Montgomery. So I bring this baggage to the table. So the question about the STEPS program that I really have been curious about is, what number of students are attending from each of the towns? I'm wondering if the percentage is roughly equal, if some towns are taking more advantage of the STEPS program than other towns. And the reason that I'm in hindsight, I wonder if something differently could have been done for that class. The other reason I'm asking is I have a 5th grader in Berkshire whose the behaviors have started to ramp up in a similar way, it feels like, to the 8th grade class that she went. I've talked with the classroom teacher, I've talked with Mr. Roddy. He was responsive, he's making attempts, but it doesn't seem like things are changing. And I'm curious if the numbers reflect an equality in terms of how the program is being used.
So we wouldn't actually be able to report out on the number by town because there'd be so few that it would be considered identifiable, Emily. So that wouldn't be something that we could share publicly. I will say we do not look at that program as something that we have equitable shares. We have to look at it as a continuum of need, and we have to prioritize what the need is across the entire system. So it is not set up that you have 2 for this school, 2 for this school, 2 for that school. So I think that there's some confusion about that. I don't usually speak during public comment, but I think it's important to clarify that because it's a relatively new program. And there's a strong connection to the work we're trying to do within our schools, in our MTSS system, and strengthening the things that are happening there so that fewer students need that level of support in the specialized programs. So if there are when you have a concern like that, obviously the principal is the first line, then myself, and then it would be the NMB board.
things that I'm confused about, that we have a certain number of slots. My concern is that kids are in school that can't access their education because they're spending so much of their day in the planning room, and it's affecting the other students' ability to access that education. So I'll continue to work with Mr. Roddy, and I'll bring concerns to you after that point. I just want to make sure that it's equitable across the towns, that we're accessing this wonderful program to build in our district in a way that is using that continuum of need, if there's a comparison across the board.
Okay, I appreciate hearing that, certainly, and like as Lynn said, Emily, you know, working with your building leader, and then you can bring, if there are further concerns, to Lynn, you know, steps related stuff, maybe Michelle Parrish gets pulled in, and then certainly because you're speaking about students in the NMV district, you know, then you can come to the NMV board if you feel, after working through the kind of those steps with different people, you still need to, you know, have some issues addressed. You can come to the NMB meeting. Our next meeting will be November 4th? 6th. First Wednesday of each month is the NMV board.
Understood.
Okay, thank you so much.
I just don't.
Okay. Thanks, Emily. Okay. That was,
I was in and out.
what's that?
I was in and out.
Oh, okay. All right, so it would help, it's helpful for us if you state your name,
Karen Jacobs,
Karen, and your town of residence.
Enosburg.
Okay, great. All right. Please.
Okay, I was here at the last meeting and I was talking about the no longer valedictorian and salutatorian. And I have since then went to the local school board and told me that the change is that it's proficiency-based learning now. That's the way the school is doing it now. And so that's why they thought they had a board meeting and they had a policy change, et cetera, so that it's now proficiency-based learning. So I printed off what was on your website on what is proficiency-based learning and why is it important. And I understand it, but when I'm reading it, it's almost sounding like when my kids were in school, they had what they called IEPs. I don't know if they still have that now, individualized. That's what this proficiency sounds like to me. If that's the case, do each student have someone that's assigned to them to help them work through their program? Is that something someone can answer me?
Lynn, who do you feel?
So proficiency, I feel like I'm in such an awkward position, but I'm gonna just move myself. Proficiency-based graduation requirements are actually in state statute. That's something that across the state we're all supposed to be working with.
Working towards, not everybody has it yet. Correct?
Everybody has some version of it, but when they passed that, they didn't have clear guidance about how you approach it within each of your systems. So it is not the same as IEPs. It's really about identifying what are the skills and dispositions that we want all students to not only, historically they had to sit in the seat long enough and not fail to be able to graduate. Now, we want them to be able to demonstrate that they're proficient in that skill, so they have to be able to meet that standard in order to graduate. So it really isn't about having, it's not an IEP. We do personalize, so there are opportunities for kids to do things that are in classes and things that are outside of classes, so you don't have to take the traditional pathway. You can demonstrate proficiencies through other experiences, so you can have some flexible learning opportunities or personalized learning opportunities, and then there are staff members in the school that will work with kids, not on a one-on-one basis, but they'll work and advise kids in terms of what that pathway is and how they can demonstrate that they're proficient in order to be able to reflect that in their plan.
Okay, does the student or does the school decide what path these children should go on?
It is a collaboration with the school, the student, and the parents.
So where's the motivation for these students?
It's actually pretty high motivation when it comes to being able to personalize what it is they're working towards. There's a whole section. I'm going to connect you with Gab Wondrup, who can give you more information. She is our curriculum director, and I'll connect you to her. She can provide you information from both our website, and there's some other tools like the motivation. I think the video that we have speaks directly to that.
Okay, so my next question basically would be, would this board be willing to revisit the valedictorian, salutatorian policy? Would they be willing to open that up for discussion again?
So this is kind of, it's going to the question and answer piece that we don't typically
Right.
do, so
So
all
when
of those.
am I supposed to ask these questions?
So you typically would ask me, but in the board usually hears what the concerns are, but they don't usually go back and forth. I don't mind taking this one if you.
That's fine, we just need to be mindful of the time, it's a long meeting,
Right.
so,
So we have a regular review process, so the community can participate as those policies come up for review, and that's every 3 years, so I have to look, I don't know where that is on the cycle, but when that comes up for review, the public is certainly willing to come in and give feedback. It'll be written on the agenda, as you can see, like, the way the agendas are written, you can see which policies are up for
And
review.
where do I find that agenda?
Online.
Online? What I found about the proficiency and the board members and,
There's other locations, but Courtney's not here to help me. Where are the other locations, do you remember?
I believe they're physically posted to schools, but the
Town clerks?
FNESU website, I'm not sure if the SU board is at all the town clerks, but maybe.
You mean the agenda or the actual policies?
The agenda that has policies listed.
Okay, I think it's at town clerks.
Yeah.
I feel as though we looked at that policy, I wanna say within the last year, that valedictorian, salutatorian policy, but,
they said it was 7 years and it's been 4 years because they wanted to have the incoming freshmen be on this new route rather than the old route.
That's what it was originally adopted.
Right.
so I think that, reaching out to Gab about the curriculum piece, and then I can dig in with Lynn a little bit about the policy and when that might be coming back before the board. It's still a little unclear to me what your concern with the actual policy is and how it intersects. I mean, it seems like you have concerns over how it intersects with proficiency-based learning, and then how salutatorians and valedictorians are then chosen. Is that the nexus of your concern?
Yes.
Okay.
I would like to see it come back. It's I think it's motivation more so than quality. I don't know, how would you word it? This is Nancy, she was a valedictorian of her class.
I actually live in Franklin, but I grew up in Enosburg. I did first through 12th grade in Enosburg, and I was a valedictorian. What happens with the kids that are academically really adept and know that's where they're headed, know they're headed already by the time you're a senior, know you're headed to college, know you're likely to go to grad school. It seems to me they're getting shortchanged somehow.
Shortchanged
Because if you're headed to college and you have a pretty good idea that what you want to do eventually is going to involve grad school, you're looking at much more competitive situations. You may be looking at out-of-state schools, very likely out-of-state grad schools. You're looking at doing something in life where you have to be certified, licensed.
And how exactly does the valedictorian, salutatorian piece factor in or limit in any capacity that trajectory for those students?
Because being valedictorian means that you have done all the work, all the time, and you've done it very well. And the distinction to be, well, no, it's useful. I mean, when you're a kid, you don't have much on your resume. It allows you, gives you so many more opportunities just as an undergrad.
Well, I would say, and really then I'm going to turn back to the focus of the meeting, that those are distinctions or honors, however you want to phrase them, that are given to one or two students. And we certainly have many more students that are adept, excellent performers in their classes heading on, to whatever kind of pathway. So I think I'm missing the importance, really. I mean, it's a great honor, of course, but lots of students do just as well, and there can only be one valedictorian, one salutatorian, and I don't think that diminishes the pathway that those other students who are equally capable and adept are heading.
We actually have, from each of our schools, the students who attain the highest honor, the summa cum laude, that we have a track record of kids getting into a variety of really highly competitive schools under the Latin honors system. And it's much more common for schools to be shifting to Latin honors now than to be staying with the LaSalle policy.
And I'd say, as a parent of a senior now who's applying to quite a wide array of 18 different colleges and universities across the country, he is taken a very rigorous course load all the way through. All of his college decisions will be in before he would even potentially be chosen as valedictorian or salutatorian. It matters none for his college applications. What matters is everything he's done for the last 3 years, plus this first semester, and obviously finishing up strong in the senior year. And he's applying to Ivy League schools, excellent state schools, schools in the California system, and everything in between. So I think that what matters more is the coursework and how the students have achieved, if they are indeed looking at that college pathway. And that's only one pathway of many successful pathways to choose, certainly, the college-bound pathway. So, I mean, I hear your concerns. I don't necessarily think that they really encapsulate the whole piece of what you're trying to get at, is how do we keep our students really motivated and engaged in their academics, their learning, and their striving for whatever they believe they want to do post-high school. I don't necessarily think that one honor like that comes after college applications, and I'm highlighting college because that's what you were talking about. So for those students, it's really not a wildly meaningful distinction, and for how those decisions college-wise come down for them. Happens after the fact at the end of the school year. It's not to diminish that that's a great accomplishment, but I also think there are lots of kids who are doing just also equally awesome and don't get that singular distinction at the end of their high school careers. And I don't think it means that they haven't also strived and worked really hard and done really well. All right, thank you. All right, so moving on, Leah, you're up with our spotlight.
Morgan, are you in the driver's seat?
For what it's worth.
Thank you. So the focus of my spotlight tonight is to bring some common understanding around our local comprehensive assessment system. And really, it's intended to be our clear vision of how we're monitoring effective teaching and learning throughout the system. You can go ahead, Morgan. The context for understanding how our local common assessment system sits within it really falls under Act 173, which looked at enhancing a couple different pieces across all of our supports. So focusing in on the LCAS for us is about really having information available so that we are using data and other measures to really inform our practices and strengthen our instruction across all of our grades. Some of the links in the slideshow, like the VT MTSS field guide, are links that'll take you if you're interested in knowing more about it, but really trying to condense it down into 15 minutes. Go ahead, Morgan. So what I want to highlight the most as we look through the rest of the slideshow is that one of the major intents of a local common assessment system is to ensure that we're meeting the needs of our students. We want most of our students to be able to engage in first instruction and have their educational needs met. But we do know that some students are going to struggle, so we're not going to intervene our way out of that, but we really want to focus on the core instruction so that students who are maybe having more academic challenges are able to access. So students are expected to all be participating within reason to their first instruction. So this system-wide approach is one of the reasons why we made shifts in our curriculum practices coming into this year. We are in the process of our first year of implementation for new literacy programs, K-8. And that's one piece that's kind of enhancing our local common assessment system. And the other piece around Act 173 is that we are providing that specialized instruction for students that do have more intensive needs. Go ahead, Morgan. The big piece for me that I want to highlight around a balanced assessment system, and it kind of couples nicely with our shift towards proficiency-based learning, is that we're looking at student performance in a variety of ways. So I think the common understanding of assessment systems is that there's a test that we give or a test that students take, and that particular piece of evidence is where we make a lot of decisions. But as we continue to enhance our system, there's other pieces that will come into play as being part of our overall assessment, which will include components of the portrait of a graduate and that proficiency-based approach to graduation, as well as personal learning plans. So those are the personalized learning plans. That is another component of students working 7th grade and above, is really focusing in on some of those methods and strategies that they want to be able to highlight for both themselves and also based on their needs. Just a couple other examples. Ways that we communicate student progress are through student-led conferences, report cards, conferencing. We want to have clear performance criteria with priority standards that we have across all of our grade levels in order to know that we are enhancing the effectiveness of our first instruction. Go ahead, Morgan. And really, it's to empower us to have a strong local assessment system that's rich of data collection. So it's, again, through multiple means. The conversations that are happening at an elementary school are much different using the data than at the high school. So having that variety allows for teachers to both respond and also plan effectively for where the kids might need to go. It is not just a list of assessments that we give, but really the intent is to describe the assessments as a way that we are informing the overall success of our system. So it's not intended to be just a laundry list of tests. If you advance to the next slide, again here you can follow this link on the FNESU Local Common Assessment Plan. This will bring you to a document that was revamped coming into the school year to highlight some of the pieces that we are leaning in towards. I'm not sure if you click it, but this is a screenshot, so I'm going to focus in on literacy if you want to explore it more. All of our teachers and our staff have access to this document. It's created to give everybody clear understandings of the rationale of why we're using the assessment. This particular example shows a mix of different literacy assessments that we're using K through 12 to cover a bunch of different purposes. So there's curriculum-based measures that are happening in the classroom alongside our curriculum. There are standalone measures such as the STAR assessment, which we use as our benchmarking assessment as a screener tool. There are additional assessments such as it's a little small, like words their way spelling inventory is a particular one that's new to our assessment plan this year. And that is really a response to the Act 139 around improving literacy outcomes for students and looking at both their encoding and decoding abilities. So there are certain enhancements that have come into play as we're moving forward so that we're able to make good decisions based on a variety of different data. And you can go ahead to the next slide. And really what we're hoping to do is have these data collection, arrangement, and visualization so that when our teams are meeting, so we're using our common assessments to work at our school-based MTSS teams. In our schools, we also have professional learning communities, we have grade level meetings, we have conferencing that happens, and so all of these different pieces kind of come together to inform the next steps across our grade levels. The next slide is to highlight a little bit about Renaissance. Renaissance is our computer adaptive test that we administer to students 3 times a year. This is used as both a screener and can also be used as a progress monitoring tool. There's a little bit more detail around kind of why we use it, the different purposes that it can serve for us. And the next slide too, Morgan, will be a little bit more about Renaissance. So again, the link in the top right, the Science of STAR, will give you some background information if you're curious about kind of how STAR came to be, what are the pillars of its assessment process, how did they get to be standardized in the different measures that we are using to help guide our practice. The 4 major ones that we use within that platform are called STAR Reading, Math, Early Literacy, and the STAR CBMs. And so again, just a little bit more information for everybody to have around what those different purposes are. The next slide will show a little bit about kind of that overall information that we're able to read from that. So this past September was our fall benchmark window. So that was screening done for our whole system. We had 1,392 students participated in that common assessment. We had 51% were at or above the 40th percentile across all grades, and 49% at that time were below the 40th percentile. 40th percentile is our benchmark level. It's what most experts in state assessments consider a student to be working at a grade level. It's kind of that bell curve, if you're familiar with it, that most will fall kind of in that middle range. And then we'll have students that are lower performing or higher performing. But it gives us a quick opportunity to see where our students are performing across our whole system. You can go on to the next slide. This was part of the board notes. Again, just reiterating, we had of 140 students in 3rd grade during this fall benchmark, 60% of them demonstrated proficiency at grade level. We had 15% that were nearing proficiency, 12% below, and 13% in the well below category. This is an example of one of the ways that we can analyze the data that we're able to get. So this particular cohort it can be followed over 3 years. So we're able to monitor both their performance on the STAR early literacy, when maybe it was harder for them to access the reading assessment at grade level, and also be able to monitor their performance at the grade level assessment. These are again in the board notes under the, for our section around curriculum. This is a visual too that has been shared previously, but this again ties in directly to our common assessment plan, which is that we're expecting as many students as possible to have their needs met within Tier 1 instruction, which in our system we refer to as levels 1 and 2. That some students are going to need an opportunity to have some reteaching or a double dose of that concept, and that we're able to meet their needs within that classroom instruction. We do have students that need something more. And so this is really a map that we're leaning in to use and to be deliberate about, so that we are able to respond timely and effectively to whatever the student's needs might be. So as students demonstrate a higher level of need, it is intended to be flexible and fluid for them, so that they can get that extra piece that they need, and as they're showing progress, they can move seamlessly between the level of support that best suits them. And really, I think we skipped a slide unless it didn't make it in there. Was there one right before that, Morgan, if you go back to, yeah. And so this is our response guide. So as we have students that are demonstrating less than proficient skills on any of our screeners, then we're following through to figure out what our next steps need to be. So this has been a helpful guide within each of our MTSS school level meetings, so that teams can determine what the next step should be. We use another system called EduClimber, which allows us to do some data visualization and houses both academic, social, and behavioral needs, so that we can look at the student as a whole, and allows us to do some centralized housing of consistent forms and support plans across the district. One of the things that I know that I came into was just having lack of consistency from one space to another, so a system like this has allowed that to become more formalized, so that we're able to guarantee equity no matter what school within our system that you may attend. So this has been another tool that teams have found helpful as we figure out what our next steps should be. And then the last slide is really kind of coming back full circle to what the intent and our hopes of our common assessment plan is. So we are using common assessments to ensure that instruction meets the needs of most of our students. The goal is to have at least 80% of our students' needs being met through that first instruction, that we're able to give additional time to those students that might need something more if their needs aren't being met in the classroom, so that they're getting that in addition to, not in place of. that every student who struggles will receive instruction from a highly qualified teacher, and that the instruction that they're getting is tailored to their needs, that we created and strengthened the system across all of our schools, and that we're providing that specialized instruction from those that are most skilled and trained to meet their needs. So that's a very quick version of a very complex system.
So I'm gonna at the end, do the introduction that I should have done at the beginning.
Oh, that's okay.
So Leah, you're all familiar with Leah. She is in the role of assistant curriculum director, director of instruction, assistant director of instruction and learning. And one of her main goals this year is centered around improving our MTSS system across the supervisory union. And so Leah is doing really important work from top to bottom, where she's really looking at the 30,000-foot view in terms of how does the system work across FNESU, and then she's really digging in at each school level to work with principals and school teams to say, okay, how is it working here, and what supports can I provide you to be able to strengthen your MTSS system. And like that work, there's a lot of evidence base behind developing a highly effective MTSS system and meeting students' needs at the lower levels and not waiting until they might struggle so much that they qualify for special education. So Leah's doing really important work, and we're already starting to see the benefit of that work. She's also doing work with teachers in some of the professional learning work that we're doing across the supervisory union. So it's really impactful, and the MTSS work and the local comprehensive assessment plan go hand in hand.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, they do, and we had a very successful in-service on Thursday this past week. And again, really trying to elevate the new pieces that are coming into play, which is around literacy. You know, we have almost 100 teachers participating in reading mastery, which is a strand that we've developed for in-service days. And every one of them participated in a science of reading, professional development, and common learning. And it's really, I think, exciting to see what we're doing and how all the pieces are coming in to work together. So I'm proud to share.
Question for you, Leah. So can you talk a little bit about it, like, is there a state or federal mandate that talks about democratizing assessments generally across the system? And I mean, is that, and then are you pulling these assessments from like a bank of recommended assessments and bringing it down to our level?
There are probably more tried and true uses of them. Different systems do use different tools. Ames Web is a common use instead of the STAR through Renaissance. Vermont does not expect a certain system to be used or a certain assessment.
Okay.
Their common assessment is our state assessment. And that's a once annual assessment, which is helpful, but it doesn't give us that real-time information that we need in order to do it. Nationally, I don't know that we'll get to a point where there's a common tool that's used at a benchmarking level. I think the flexibility is that you're picking the tool that best serves your needs. It's a great question. I would like to see more consistency personally, so that it doesn't matter if you're in Franklin East or West or Lamoille South or North or wherever you might find yourself, that those consistent tools are there, because they're not always apples to apples as we have students move between districts. But it's a wondering.
What the state does require is that we have an MTSS system and that we have a local comprehensive assessment system. But what you put into that is for us to work out and navigate. So we have been trying to use an evidence base behind all of those decisions.
Right, and that's what I think was really important for us moving into this year, was having a clear explanation for the rationale of why those assessments are there. So if you want to explore more on the Common Assessment Plan, there's also digging deeper assessments. So we have follow-up. So when we know that students aren't proficient at that grade level, that there are additional tools and additional measures that can be used to better inform what the student needs. And that's something that I'm working hard to have everybody embrace. So that's one of the curriculum-based measures, is one tool that people can use to better inform when they're not quite sure what the next step should be.
Got it. Thank you, very helpful.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, Morgan, that brings us to your budget report.
Okay, so in terms of FY24, the auditors were on site at the beginning part of this month. The supervisory union gets what's called a single audit, which is a deep dive into a certain amount of federal money that we spent. The two programs that they picked for FY24 were the food service program and the Title I grant. I think I've mentioned this at the local board meetings, but I'll mention it here as well. They came with more people than we've seen in the past and stayed longer than we've seen in the past. So we had a much more significant, deeper dive into the work that we've been doing. Both the food service program and the Title I, we believe, came out clean. I think Dawn had 2 days of hell working with them, trying to come up with all the paperwork and the documentation they were looking for, and she was able to produce it all. And similar with Title I, and we've got a few things we're still waiting for from the schools, but everything I've heard is that it's all going to be clean, and so kudos to Dawn and Jen for the federal piece, and as always to Franny and Sonia for doing what needs to be done for me to come here and take the credit. And so I expect by January, February, we'll have the final audit, and we'll be bringing that to you for approval. We will, as promised, do maybe not totally deep, but a dive into the FY26 budget and budget process for the supervisory union. So similar to your local boards, we've got a budget on the schedule for your November and December meetings. For the SU, we like to have this budget buttoned up and approved by December, because then we can set the assessment, which is a big line item for your two local budgets. If we need to wait in December, if there's some data points that we don't have yet, it would probably mean that we'd want to schedule a special meeting the first week in January, so that we're not holding up the two local boards on their budgets. We're expecting the tax commissioner to give us a yield number on December 1st, and we will also get some preliminary CLA data by that point. We'll get our kid count by December 15th, at least the first version of that, and then the final CLA numbers by the 26th. None of those directly impact the supervisory union budget, but they do impact the tax rates, so as you're having your conversations locally, you're going to care about that. The 3 SU board goals, we like to put this up whenever we're talking about the budget. Keep that foremost in your mind as we think about any changes we want to make to programming for next year. We also talk about enrollment. We've got an almost final number for our October 1 count, and so this I feel is pretty accurate. You'll see from 2023 to 2024, NMV saw a little bit of a decline in terms of enrollment. Enosburg, Richford, relatively flat. I think we see those normal fluctuations as a big 8th grade class leaves NMV, goes into ER, or as kids decide what high schools they want to go to. For both of these, the long-term trend over the next 5 years is still slightly upwards, and that is bucking the trend of the state. And so it's important to remember that our reality here is different from the reality that's often portrayed statewide. And then this is the same information, but just in numbers. So we're at about 1,930 kids for 2024. Again, this is enrollment. And we're expecting that to increase over the next 3, 4 years, 5 years overall in Franklin Northeast. We'll be fleshing out the list of budget considerations, and this will kind of feed some of the discussions we have with your voters when we have a budget warned and we are going to them with public information. I'll be using about 15% as an estimate for health insurance increase premiums. That number won't be final we don't expect it will be final before your budget is in front of voters, but I think that that's probably a pretty accurate estimate. More significantly, we have mediation with your support staff union for the current year next week. We will be opening up negotiations with the teachers union for FY26, and if mediation does not land on a 2-year contract, we'll immediately be going into negotiations with your support staff as well, where salaries and benefits make up between 70, 80, 85% of your budgets. This is obviously where there's the most potential for movement. We're moving a few fractions of people in from ARPESR. There are some folks that we left until September 30th. We've talked about this in the last few years at the SU, but that is an impact on the supervisory union budget for 26. We will also be talking about using the fund balance. We are expecting to end FY24 to the good again, and so that gives us more money that we can drive back into your supervisory union budget. This is a conversation that we have every year with the local budgets. The supervisory union, because we're not allowed to borrow money, we have been working on building up a fund balance that would allow us to kind of keep the ship going for 3 months if we are late in terms of the money we get from towns. We are now at a point where we've got that level of comfort at the supervisory union, and so as we spend less than we were budgeted, spend less than we brought in previous years, we're now able to use that to drive down the assessment. So we'll be experiencing that this year. We're also expecting almost $300,000 more in the census block grant, which is the new method on how we fund special education. So we definitely don't have the same headwinds that we had going into FY25, but still a lot of uncertainty around where salaries are going to end up and benefits. In terms of staffing changes, this is version 1. We are still doing a lot of work internally at the central office, and so these numbers will change. And at the end of this, if there are programs that you want us to consider adding or subtracting, that will impact these numbers as well. First 2 lines are those last fractions of people in ESSER, so 3 coaches, a quarter time of each of those, and then the director for the advancement of educational equity, a quarter time. We're moving a little bit of Mary Ellis from CFP into the local budget. It is getting harder to justify leaving her in CFP based on the type of work that she's doing, and so we may come back to you with a little bit more coming out of CFP, but right now just a small piece of her. And then we're likely going to move half of a support person out of the central office budget into the special ed budget. We may tweak that amount in the future, and again, none of these are new people, it's just changing how we're paying for them. In food service, really just a fraction of a person going away. Dawn is very good about looking at the hours that she's got her people budgeted for, and so it's essentially a no change from the prior year. In special education right now, there's a little bit of movement. This is one where student needs change in the next 4 weeks. This budget may change in the next 4 weeks, and so none of this is set in stone, but It's looking like right now we will be bringing to you a budget with 3 fewer NCSS workers. So we're currently only have 1 in our schools that's paid out of the special education budget. And then dropping a net of 2 school-based behavior technicians, and those are those higher trained paraeducators that are working one-on-one with kids with specific needs. A little bit of a reduction in occupational therapy, and then a little bit of an increase to what I'm calling here a general ed teacher, but that's someone who's providing the general ed instruction to the kids that we have in the STEPS and the RISE programs. And then no changes to the ELL budget. We have 2 in the budget right now, and planning to bring forward 2 for next year. So before I move on, any questions on staffing or any, boy, I really wish we had this, or I really wish we didn't have this other thing?
The other thing, I don't think I saw that there was, Callie is funded, our SEL coordinator is funded out of a separate grant. So she's currently 0.5, which is 2.5 days a week, and we're putting into that grant another half day. So she would go up to the equivalent of 3 days per week.
Jennifer Kennison is also not in your local budget. She's in charge of running those 3 federal grants that we lump under CFP. And then there are a number of CFP funded positions that we talk about at your local meetings, but they're really in the CFP grant budget. You don't approve that here. That's something that we have to do an application for each year, but there's probably a dozen staff that are building based that are in there. The paraeducators that work in the STEPS and the RISE program are paid out of the ITIB grant. That's another big chunk of change that we get, where it's not part of the budget that you approve in December or in January, but they are there in the background. This chart you've seen at your local meetings. This is the FY25 homestead tax rates by district. Lowest at the bottom at $1, highest at the top at $1.80 something. And again, our 2 towns, our 2 districts are down towards the bottom in those blue lines. Our neighboring districts in Franklin County are the red lines, and then the Franklin County average and the statewide average are the 2 black lines. And this is the material you get, and this will be in the materials that we send out to voters. I realize that it's too small to see here. And so initially, that is what I'm bringing to you. We will plug in that 15% increase. We will start to make some assumptions on where we think the teacher's contract will end in terms of increasing salaries. We'll probably wait until mediation and see how that goes before I try to come up with some projections for your support staff. I'll come up with a number for unsettled contracts. I'm happy to go into executive session and share with you what we're using because it would impact negotiations. We won't do that in public session, but we want to make sure that we've got enough money in your budget somewhere for where you all are anticipating those contracts might end.
Morgan.
Yep.
So this is the 3rd year, right, that the insurance for double-digit teens?
Correct.
So is there, I guess, like, multiple questions, like, is there an end in sight? Is this the new norm every year? And maybe part 2, like, do we anticipate that there could be any changes coming down from the education committee, like the study that Governor Scott has put together at the state level of kind of an overhaul of everything? Like, do we anticipate, we just keep talking about how we can sustain this and heading into another tough budget season, and to see that number again is just kind of disheartening. Like, we have no control over it, and, where's the ceiling? Where does this end, and how do we keep going?
So there's a lot there, and this is a lot of opinion, I would say, rather than fact. I would not be surprised if the commission does come out with recommendations around healthcare. The School Boards Association, I believe, has been pushing the idea of a few relatively minor legislative changes which would change the dynamic of the healthcare commission negotiation. The reason that we have seen these increases that we have over the last 3 years is not because of a change in terms of the employer versus the employee share, which 10 years ago was the big battle, and whether we're going to pay 80% or 85%, and the teachers are going to pay X percent or Y percent. The real driver for the increase has been that the way the benefits are structured, people are using healthcare a lot more, they're using expensive pharmaceuticals a lot more, and so that's driving up the overall costs of what VHI has to pay out. And that just gets passed back in terms of the premium increases. And those increases are shared by both the teacher side and the employer side. And so, our 80% is going to go up 15%, and the teacher's 20% is going to go up 15%. So I think there's maybe potential for the teachers' union to want to enter the dialogue on how to curb those costs as well. But in my opinion, it would require a legislative change to change how that commission works in order to bend that.
One other thing that we heard in a session a couple weeks ago was, that idea of coming out of COVID, everybody got off pace with all of their doctor schedules, and no one was able to go to the doctors for like 18 months. So the wonder is also about, are we going to get to a place where that plateaus, where people have essentially caught up on all of the, not that that's going to account for all of that percentage, but can there be some diminished usage once employees generally catch up on all the specialist appointments that maybe got put off during COVID. And I do know that they're trying to do things proactively, like Jamie was at a, what was that called? A wellness meeting, and one of the things that they have identified in their data is that physical therapy, as a system we pay a lot for physical therapy, so they're offering employees access to a free online tool to be able to do physical therapy online, and that's something that's a benefit to everyone. I've actually personally been using it, and it's a pretty good tool. So that's a theory of, if you provide a tool like that, can we maybe decrease usage there as well?
Yeah. I think so.
Has there ever been a discussion at the state level of taking the health insurance benefit piece completely away from all the individual districts and supervisory unions, and having that part of people's, of staff and teachers and employment packages be managed outside of the local, and not factor into the local budget? Salary, decouple it from salary so that it becomes an issue that the state needs to figure out for its people, for staff and teachers? Or is that just, that would never happen?
Not by anybody with any power, put it that way.
Yeah. Because I'm with Kat in seeing that it seems incredibly untenable financially, to have double-digit increases with no ceiling in sight. It's very daunting to think of how we're going to be able to accommodate that, and thread this needle between
Right.
What our taxpayers can can handle and what we require in order to run our schools and provide good benefits for our people.
Mhm.
So. Okay. Thanks, Morgan. Lynn,
Okay.
you are up.
So I will tell you that under personnel, this month, there's nothing that requires action from the board. Everything that is in there is all informational. I will, at the end of the meeting, ask that we go into executive session so we can talk about administrator negotiations. So we have several administrators across the supervisory union that fall under the FNESU umbrella. So employees here at central office that work full year, 260 days. And then some of the centralized professional employees that work out, work some here and some out in programs or out in schools that are more than 187 but less than 260 days. So I'm just gonna ask the board to give me some direction in terms of negotiating with those employees. Any questions on that? Okay. So we are hosting at Enosburg High School on October 30th, interim secretary Saunders and her team will be sharing statewide data around, engaging in a discussion with community members. This isn't specific to Enosburg or even FNESU, but they're holding these listen and learn sessions across the state of Vermont. And there's really one in most regions of the state. So we're kind of the northwest corner of the state. So people from anywhere can attend at Enosburg. There is a pre-registration link. People are not required to pre-register, but they certainly can if they would like to. So that will be again from 6 to 8 at Enosburg High School. I'm going to shift us now to a slideshow. Here. So what's that? It is quite warm in this room. I'm going to talk a little bit about Vermont's education finance system and the impact that system has on FNESU. So before I start, I just want to just say out loud that there is really a lot going on in Vermont's education funding system right now. There's a lot you heard last year about education funding, and there's a lot you'll hear this year. There are big feelings that are associated with all the aspects of how this impacts taxpayers and how this impacts our schools and opportunities for our students. And there are big feelings associated with data, the data that I'm going to share with you tonight. I wanted you to hear some of this information from me before. It's going to be some of the data that as a state will be shared. It is already being shared at the state level. So there's an article out yesterday about a report that also came out yesterday that I'm going to talk to you about. In this slideshow, I do not have recommendations embedded. This is me providing you with our current reality and the data about the current reality and how that reflects on FNESU. So I think that some of the data might make certain people uncomfortable, and I think we just need to sit in that for a little bit and recognize that our data is our data. That's our reality. Yesterday there was a big report called the PICUS report. It was an evidence-based approach to identifying an adequate education spending level in Vermont. That was commissioned by the Vermont Legislative Joint Fiscal Office, sorry. So we're going to be talking a little bit about that, and we've already talked about in this meeting the Commission on the Future of Public Education, so you're going to hear some things about that as well. I think that going into this conversation, I think keeping in our minds that I think we all expect there are going to be major changes that happen related to education, both during this legislative session and during future legislative sessions. And I'm gonna jump in and talk a little bit about this. So just rewinding to last year, in FY25, we all remember what we experienced last year. So nearly a third of all school budgets in Vermont failed on town meeting day. On the NMV side, It took us 2 votes to get that budget approved on April 30th. On the Enosburg-Richford side, it took us 3 votes, and we got our budget approved on June 25th. So the impact that that had on schools, particularly in FNESU, one of the things I'll say about FNESU is that our schools have historically been underfunded when compared to other schools across Vermont. And so you could see way down at the bottom of that graph, this is a visual you've definitely seen before. After the budget defeats in the spring of 2024, only 5 districts in Vermont spent less per pupil than the ERUSD district. And 4 of those systems didn't operate schools. So only 1 system that operated schools spends less than we do per pupil. Only 8 districts spent less per pupil than the Northern Mountain Valley district. So that's kind of the impact of the cuts that we made. We've historically been in the bottom 20 that drove us much closer to the bottom. In terms of what's happening at the state level, you've heard us talk about, and if you've listened to the VPR or if you're watching any sort of a news cycle, Act 183 of this past legislative session required the development of a commission on the future of public education in Vermont. That commission has been working, and they are tasked with making some short-term recommendations in December, on December 15th of this year. And by December, I believe it's December 15th of 2025, they need to make their major recommendations about any reform that's going to come around the public education system. So there are really 3 elements when you think about what they're tasked with. They're really tasked with looking at what's the education finance system, and that's looking at ed spending, it's looking at how revenue is generated going into the ed fund, and how the use of, things about the use of the ed fund. It's also a task with looking at governance, so looking at like the resources and the administrations or configurations within districts or supervisory unions. It's also tasked with looking at the education delivery model, so that's about the physical size and footprint of Vermont's education delivery system. So as a state, as they're looking for solutions, we won't find, there are 3 categories there. You could go to the next slide, Morgan. They're not going to find a solution that fits in only one of those buckets. They're going to have to look at all of the buckets to examine what will work to help us all out of where we are in terms of the crisis related to the impact on tax rates that people are really pushing back on, and the disparity between educational opportunities from our lowest spending to our highest spending systems across the state. So when you think about education spending, there are really 4 big parts of education spending when you look at our budget. The first is personnel. As Morgan reminds us all the time, that is a huge part of our budget. It's the biggest part of our budget. That's really what we decide to build into our budget in terms of staffing numbers, salaries, and those benefits that we just had a conversation about. There's also facilities, and thinking about what does it take for us to keep our 9 school buildings operating, what kind of routine cleaning and maintenance do we need, what kind of deferred maintenance things do we need to address, and what are some of the facilities upgrades. There's also special education, and that's us looking at the programming needs of the students who have disabilities who receive special education. It's looking at their programming, staffing, tuition, and transportation. And on the NMV side, there's another element around education spending that they don't have any control over, and that's the tuition payment to other public high schools. Those students on the NMV side, when the merger piece happened, the communities decided not to merge into one district because those NMV schools had high school choice. And at the time, it was very clear from those communities they did not want to give up high school choice. So those kids can choose where they want to go to high school. So that means that that district pays tuition payments to public high schools and to private and parochial high schools as well. So that's really the education spending part of this, and then there's the delivery model. So within the delivery model, that includes class and school size, so the number of students per teacher, per staff, There are a lot of ratios that we're gonna be working through in the next year, thinking about, what does our model look like, and are we right-sized in terms of that? It also looks at class size and school size. The other piece of it is looking at the size of a district and the infrastructure. So for us, we have a supervisory union structure. So again, we have that supervisory union structure because we have one side that operates one way and another side that operates fewer classes and pays tuition out to those high school students. So yesterday, there was a report that was released. I will admit I'm about a third of the way through the report. It's pretty dense and there's a lot in it. So this is the PICUS report that I was talking about. There was an article that came out in Digger yesterday afternoon, really highlighting the summary data in the PICUS report. It says that Vermont is spending at least $400 million more than needed on education, but it's not that simple. I'll give you the slideshow. If you click on where that article is, it'll bring you right to that article. What it is telling you is that the operational configurations that we have in Vermont make it more expensive to educate our students. So that's something that they're asking us to take into consideration as we're looking for solutions around this. So when I think about this, I think that we're at that place where we're at an intersection that's really where education spending and the delivery system that we have had for generations in Vermont are kind of, we're at an intersection there. So one thing I think it's important for us to remember as we engage in discussions in our community and across the state, and again, I hope that other systems across the state are having very similar conversations with their boards and with their leaders and educators. So how we choose as a state to spend our dollars, no matter where you are in Vermont, impacts the education quality in each of our communities. So education quality has a direct impact on outcomes for all FNESU and all Vermont students. So when we look at the disparity between where we are in terms of what we can spend per pupil and the top of that graph that I showed you earlier on, there's a pretty big difference between what you can offer students when you're at the bottom and what you can offer students when you're at the top. So we're at this place where we're not providing a substantially equal educational opportunity for the students in Vermont, even though that's something that we are constitutionally obligated to do. So the other piece I just want to remind people of is that decisions that are made elsewhere, because we have a statewide education funding system that really impacts our dollar yield. All the spending goes into determining what that dollar yield was. And last year, as we were going through this process, we saw how spending in other places impacted our dollar yield and what that would have done to our tax rate. So it is not a one-for-one. We can make decisions in our local budget that will impact our local tax rate, and there are other factors outside of our control that will also impact our local tax rate. So this is data at the Vermont level. This is our reality. So this is about personnel. So as you can see by looking at this, the US average for this is pupils per staff in the public school system is 7.45. In Vermont, it is 4.1. So we are ranked 51st in the United States. You can see on the visual on the right, the red line reflects the growing number of employees we have in the state. The blue line reflects the number of students that we're educating in the state. I'm sure you've heard that in the media before, that we have more staff and fewer students in the state. This data provides evidence of both of those things. So in FNESU, we're currently examining what our ratios look like. We did get a first look at a data set from the Agency of Education. It is not yet clear to us when we're looking at those ratios, how they're calculating their ratio, which category of staff fall within each of those domains. So there's more work for us to do to be able to hone in specifically to what our staffing ratio is. So that's work that is coming up that you can expect to hear back from me about. Another part of the education finance system is related again to education spending. It's really the salary and benefits that we offer to our employees. For those of you who have been here for a while, this board has worked strategically for years to improve our teacher and administrator salaries to be more competitive regionally as both a recruitment and a retention strategy. And we just had a lengthy discussion about what this statewide healthcare bargaining agreement has done in terms of our spending. The next slide is data related to education spending and particularly focused on special education. And this is over the course of a 4-year period. It is a couple years old at this time. Across the state, special ed spending has increased about 10%. And the census block grant that Morgan was talking about is flat. It isn't growing at the same rate. For us in FNESU, we have a little bit of a different reality. We're not following the statewide trend of increased costs associated with special ed programming. And I think that you won't be surprised as to why. So Leah just presented to you information around our MTSS system. And as a supervisory union, we really kind of leaned in. When kids struggle, we want to catch them at the earliest possible opportunity. So when they start to struggle in the classroom, we want to catch them at that first tier. And then if they need some additional support, we have more of the middle level interventions and supports, and we're trying to get really targeted and specific to reduce the number of students who actually need to get to tier 3, which actually, by reducing the number of students who need tier 3, allows us to be more effective with those students. So the goal is to get better at tier 1 to meet the needs of most 80% of our students at that level, recognizing that some will need some additional time and support through intervention and maybe an ESD plan, and that fewer will have more intensive needs that fall into that special ed realm. So all the work that we're doing across the organization does have an impact on what's happening in special ed. So 17% of our FNESU students qualify for and receive special education services. We have taken a different approach when it comes to how we offer supports to students who really struggle to participate in the general ed classroom setting. So historically, our system and many others would contract with outside service providers, typically the mental health agency, to contract and have people come in and support one-on-one with students in our schools. We also would send students to alternative programs in other parts of the county or the region or the state so that they could better meet the children's needs. What we found is that oftentimes when we did that, those kids didn't transition back very readily. And what happened during COVID is that most of those services that our students had relied upon, the staffing structure kind of fell apart during COVID, so they were not readily accessible. So here we are now in a place where we have 2 programs, Rise and Steps, that are better meeting the needs of our students. Do we have enough space for all of the demand? No, we heard that earlier in the meeting, and that's something that obviously we're going to continue to work on. What I think we need to appreciate is that we have this. And most other systems don't. Most other systems are trying to replicate what Michelle and her team have built here. She was on a call today with another system in Vermont that wants to come and visit and wants to come try to model a system after what we're doing. We have, on the next slide, some cost comparisons. So before we were able to build our in-house alternative programs, we were looking at if you had a child that needed a placement at Project SOAR, or Laraway, or Belkate. So one is St. Albans, one is Johnson, Belkate is Essex, I believe. So you can see across the bottom between $84,000 and $127,000. And I'll just draw your attention to the third line down and look in particular at the transportation costs associated with each of those cost comparisons. So one of the things that we're able to do by providing it in our local community is not only allow students opportunities to reintegrate slowly in a phased approach back into the local public schools, but we have eliminated the need to spend tens of thousands of dollars on transportation for each of those students. So you can see across the bottom, this is data from last school year, what the STEPS program is costing us per student and what the Rise and TAPS program is costing us per student. Another element around education spending, as I said, is facilities. Facilities needs in Vermont, on the top left, as of January 2024, they were based on the facilities needs assessment that they did as a state. There were $228 million worth of immediate facility needs that they identified in the state of Vermont. The total estimated projection of facility needs over the course of the next 20 years is $6.3 billion across the state of Vermont. So in FNESU, there's been a moratorium on school construction aid since 2008. So in the absence of any school construction aid, FNESU schools have contended with some deferred maintenance, and we now have 2 schools who have tested positive for PCBs. They're in need of remediation, and now there is no more state aid available to us. So we're left to figure out what we're going to do with that on our own. That was legislatively mandated, the PCB testing. So in 2022, this board, as you were building your budget, you made a decision to move to a model where we had a facilities director within FNESU to contend with some of the growing facilities needs and priorities. So Vern is here tonight, our facilities director. Since he has been with us, he has received more than he's applied for with Heather's help, and received more than $612,000 in state and federal grant funding to address some of our facilities needs. These projects not only met an immediate need, they're also going to result in longer-term cost savings for our districts. 2 of the examples are the LED lighting projects and some of the green energy alternative shifts with chip boilers at Richford Junior High School and coming soon to Berkshire. What this strategy also did, as we're focusing on improved academic outcomes for our students, is it also freed up our administrators to focus on learning, because that's what we hired them to do, is focus on improving academic outcomes. That shift also is helping us to have a better product when it comes to facilities, because I'll speak about not disparaging any of our principals, I'll speak about myself as a principal. I had no business making decisions about the water system that I was the owner of. That's what you're called when you run a water system, when I was the principal of Berkshire. I wasn't trained for that. I had to learn about that, and I was not the most skilled or qualified person to be making those decisions yet. There's no facilities director that fell on my plate. So we don't have that now. Vern is very skilled and has the expertise to do that work. Another element that we should talk about when it comes to education spending is that tuition piece. And this is something that is unique to the NMV district. So districts like NMV across the state who do not operate high schools, unless they designate another local public high school or up to 3 local public high schools, they must pay the full tuition to approved independent schools, which can far exceed the statewide average announced tuition. Data that we received last week, 14% of Vermont students attend private schools. From FY22 to FY23, overall tuition costs increased by 5%. In FY24, NNV paid $186,000 to approved independent and religious schools for some students. Schools in the private system do not follow the same quality assurance rules as public schools. One example is educator licensure is not required. Schools in private systems are not required to participate in standardized testing, and there are no cost containment measures that are required of private schools. Private schools also do not have to follow the same rules around non-discrimination based on race, poverty, disability, LGBTQ+, etc. So on the NMV side, this is really just representing where in the world have our NMV tuition dollars gone. So you can see the private schools in Vermont, St. John's River Academy, Rice, Vermont Commons, Burke Mountain Academy. Outside of Vermont, Byfield, Mass, Troy, New York, and Washington, Connecticut. And outside of the US, Phuket, Thailand, Stansted, Quebec. I don't know how to say that.
Not at all. Japan.
And Alberta. So you can see that we have sent money in a lot of places to educate students outside of the public education system in Vermont. So the other piece of the education funding finance system that is important to look at is the use of the education fund. So let's look at the far left. This is money, if you think about that bucket there, that's all the money we have to pay for our schools in the state of Vermont. The green represents the money that's flowing out of that bucket. It is going to things other than educating our students. It's paying for PCB remediation and mitigation. That allocation, however, has now run out. Universal free meals and early college, those are a few examples. In the middle, there is money that should be going into the education fund that is not going into the education fund. There's a link here. If you want to learn more, I'm going to give you a high-level description. I just learned about this. Tax increment financing districts in the state of Vermont. By way of example, if you want to do a community infrastructure project in your community, like you want a new water system, you can apply to be a TIF district. And what that means is, once you have that infrastructure, your property values actually improve. So your grand list should grow as a result of that infrastructure project. So when it comes to those TIF districts, instead of 100% of that additional, I'm struggling a little, you can jump in just a moment, of that additional tax base, instead of all of that feeding into the ed fund, 30% of that money goes into the ed fund and 70% of that money goes to that municipality to pay the debt on the TIF district project. So they'll be able to use that 70% over a period of 20 years. At the end of the 20-year period, when the TIF district project has been paid off, then the education fund will get the full amount of what the grand list values really are in those TIF district communities. How did I do?
Pretty good.
You want to add anything there?
No, so you're seeing this across the state, close to home. St. Albans is the closest one to us, where they pass that TIF district, they improve the streetscape or the water system or whatever it is. I, as a private business, I'm going to invest my money now into my property there because I can double the production of my factory, let's say. So my factory goes from $10 million value to a $20 million value. That additional value is what Lynn is talking about, and 20 years from now, that will provide the full amount of money to the ed fund. But in the interim, the municipality is basically taking that money to pay off the infrastructure that they built.
This was a surprising one for me in terms of impacts on the education fund, and this is something that I do hope there will be greater transparency at the state level of really talking about and owning what is in the ed fund, what's coming directly out of the ed fund, what should be going in, that's not, and where are the cost shifts that have happened to locally. So that's linked, again, if you want more information, you can click that link and it will bring you to more information about the TIF districts.
So money from the ed fund goes into these municipal, commercial projects.
So the increased value of those commercial projects in a municipal TIF district doesn't go into the ed fund for 20 years.
Okay.
So it's not money coming out, but it's money that should be coming in that isn't. So that money is held out for the municipality to pay down their debt.
Gotcha.
70% of that, you said.
70%. So it's a fair amount of money that is not being generated as revenue into the ed fund. So the other is about cost shifts into local budgets. So the biggest of those is the mental health services. So this is something that, has just been shifting out of AHS into local budgets for a variety of factors. I've got a little note down there. And the note was actually from a report from 2016, and the quote on it just said, increased demand and limited capacity for community-based mental health and social services has shifted responsibility for providing these services to schools. In the face of their own capacity limitations, schools have responded by either contracting with private providers or paying for students to attend special programs or programs outside of the district. That was from 2016. We were already identifying a problem back then. That has grown exponentially post-COVID, where even if we wanted to access some of those services, they're much more limited than they were before. So I think that it's important to really tune into that, and we've certainly found a way to try to manage some of that. That's why we're focusing on SEL with our students. That's why we've invested in alternative programs and other mental health staff within our school system. So really, when we're talking about education finance in the state, we talked in the beginning about that Commission on Public Education and thinking about what their charge is. They really can't only look at education spending, and that's one of the narratives that we hear often is we just need to reduce spending. We just need to reduce spending. That's going to disproportionately impact systems like ours if that's the only measure that people look at. We also have to look at the use of the ed fund, and we also have to look at the revenue structures going into the ed fund. The next piece to talk about is the education delivery system. So that's how we choose to deliver education in Vermont. So in terms of Vermont's national ranked largest to smallest average school size, Vermont's ranked 46th. And then this is the same data that I showed you on a previous slide in terms of per pupils per staff. Vermont is ranked 51st. So we have some of the smallest schools and some of the highest staffing levels in the country.
Lynn,
Yes.
can I just ask a quick question back on that slide?
Sure.
Since I've seen it twice now. So the 4.4 number, and you just talked about the mental health services that Vermont has taken on in our schools, from 2016. Do all other states, when we're being compared to other states and they have a higher number of staff to pupils, but are they taking on the same things that we've taken on, do you know?
So that is a great question. That is pre-COVID data that you're looking at right there. That's from 2019. I don't know about every state, but I know that in some states they have a much healthier mental health system, and they have really prioritized youth mental health in some states. I know that we have a mental health coalition in the state of Vermont, and there is often data that they forward that are really exemplars that are happening in other states about how to better support youth mental health, and the focus isn't on the school being the provider in some of those other states. So it isn't, that's a great point, it's not reflective of that cap.
And one other question on this slide, you've got the rankings here. What about Vermont in terms of academic proficiency and performance? Where do we rank amongst the other states?
So I can bring you that. I was going to ask for what other data. When the only measure that's really in common is the NAEP. And I think that the NAEP in literacy, anybody have that off the top of their head? I think we're like 5th. I want to say 5th and 13th, but I'll get you that for literacy and math. So in terms of our education delivery system in FNESU, this is how we choose to deliver education. So we have a supervisory union with a side-by-side district structure. So we have that Northern Mountain Valley district that operates pre-K through 8 and pays tuition 9 through 12. And then we have the Enosburg-Richford UUSD. They operate pre-K through 12. This is considered our governance structure. In FNESU, this represents our 2 districts. So you can see on the left, visually, we operate 4 schools, 828 total students, pre-K through 8 on the NMV side, and you can see in the font that's very, very small. Green is Sheldon, blue is Bakersfield, red is Berkshire, and yellow is Montgomery. On the Enosburg-Richford side, you have 2 pre-K through 5 schools operating with 444 total students. The blue represents Enosburg Elementary, the red represents Richford Elementary. On the right, you have our 7 through 12 schools. So we have 659 total students in those 2 high schools, 221 at Richford and 438 at Enosburg. On the bottom, we operate 1 CTE center with 95 Enosburg students, 33 Richford students, and 7 students that tuition from out of district. Now, in terms of the count for the CTE, that's a double count. Those kids are not in addition to the 659 we're operating. Those kids spend half their time at the CTE center and half their time in their high schools. I did not adjust, those are actual students. It's not like how much time they spend there, so I didn't adjust those numbers. So that's considered our operational delivery system. So in the PICUS report that I told you about earlier, and this is a piece that is already out there on the news, this report, also linked where it's in blue, is about, can the state get to a place where they look at a new funding model? And what all the data in this is really leading up to is, can we get to a place where you could say, this is the adequacy formula, so every system in Vermont gets X number of dollars per student with some considerations for weights. The weights in the PICUS study are different than the weights that we saw in Act 127. Yes?
Sure.
My brain just went blank with the numbers. So their weights in the PICUS study are centered around poverty, students with disabilities, and students who are emerging multilingual. There are no other weights that are contemplated there. This is the piece where Digger was reporting out on, we're operating schools, we could be doing it for about $400 million less. It has to do with the operational configurations and school sizes. So in that PICUS report, they talk about the evidence base. It's a lot of reference to evidence in the report, and it's about looking for economic efficiencies and having the right size so that you can improve opportunities for students to improve ultimately student performance. So what their recommendation in this report is that elementary schools, the just right size is between 400 and 500 students. For secondary schools, the just right size is between 500 and 1,000 students. When it comes to our education delivery system, there are some class size recommendations that are relatively new. So on the left, this came out of the PICUS report earlier today. Elementary students, and I will look back, I think the reference was to kindergarten through 3rd grade. At the optimal class size is 15 students per class. There was an acknowledgement that in those early years where students are learning to read, that it's important to have smaller class sizes. How they define smaller is actually bigger than some of our existing class sizes. I believe the secondary was grades 4 through 12. I'll double check that. And that was 25 students was the optimum class size. Also released this year is the updated version of Vermont's education quality standards, and there were some recommendations in the EQS as well. Elementary grades K through 3, they recommend an average of less than 20 students per class, and in grades 4 through 12, an average of less than 25 students. So every October, I bring you the class size report. So each of you at your local boards has seen your class size reports. So what you see on the left is that's what our policy says for the minimum average per cluster. So you can see for grades K through 8, in our policy, the minimum average is between 10 and 14 students, which is below what the recommendations are on both the EQS and PICUS. The class size policy for 9 through 12 and for our CTE center. The CTE center is 10 students per program. That's half-day program. But for the 9 through 12, it ranges from 14 to 20 in terms of minimum average class size. We are not meeting that minimum average, and that's the next report that I'm working on. So I need to work, this is the next data set. I need to work to analyze how our minimum class size policy compares to other systems across Vermont, how that intersects with the PICUS report recommendations, the new ed quality standards recommendations, And then I'll actually be looking at how does all of that compare to our actual class size as of October 1, 2024. So I intend to report out on what percentage of our classes meet our class size policy and what percentage would meet the other metrics as well. So that is a lot of information, and as I said at the beginning, I'm not embedding any recommendations in that information. I'm naming it. I'm telling you this is the kind of work that the state is going to be doing when they're analyzing what kind of decisions need to be made around our public school systems. So I think that one of the things that might be important is to allow our community the opportunity to interact with some of this information. And we're in the position where it took us 5 budgets to get approval, right? We had 2 on one side and 3 on the other. So the message that we heard loud and clear from our voters was that they didn't like this, we think that it was they didn't like the spending plan, they didn't like what it was doing to their tax rates. But if we go back to Morgan's report and we look at the visual that he had, could you pull that part up for tax rate? Or do you have that in your report?
I did not. The bottom 10 one?
I thought you did for tax rate, you don't have to. So really, that visual that looks like the state of Vermont with all the lines, when we're looking at spending, we're already at the bottom. So we don't, what more opportunities do we take away from kids before we're below those non-operating schools? When it comes to tax rate, the comparisons are that's the visual. So you can see where we are when you look at tax rates across the entire state. We're still way down there in the bottom 20 in terms of how we compare with the rest of the state. So if our tax rates aren't comparing high like the rest of the state and our spending is some of the lowest, what's the message that the community is getting us? So I'm wondering how the board would feel about creating some opportunities for public engagement to bring some of this information to them, to help them to see the current pressures that we're experiencing within our public school system, and engage them in some sort of a facilitated process to gather their thoughts, their priorities related to our FNESU system, our goals in this current reality that we find ourselves in, because their feedback might be useful. It might not be timely enough to be useful for this budget cycle, but a lot of the work that we're doing is centered on how are we planning for and prepping for FY27. And so we're spending some time each month with leaders, both at the central office and the principals in preparation for budget development in FY27. So I want to hear about public engagement, but I also am open to any questions or comments about all that I just shared.
Well, I appreciate you putting it together. I mean, it's great that you laid it out like that for us to try to understand some of these issues around how our configuration currently and how we are operating our system is intersecting at this kind of difficult moment with fiscal pressures on taxpayers, issues on the state level with how education is funded in the first place, and a lot of these pressures that we anticipate we're going to encounter again with this budget cycle. So it does beg really hard questions about the sustainability of our current configurations, how we operate our schools, how we staff them. And I think it would be excellent to, like you said, it may not impact the budget cycle we're in, but it's possible that in some public engagement that could potentially be, forward thinking for how we might choose in the future to reconfigure schools to try to have some cost savings in certain arenas. It can't hurt to start hearing from our community what they would like to see. How do we continue to improve our opportunities? Because what really gets lost when we have to be at the bottom of the heap with our per pupil spending are the opportunities for our students that are going to help launch them into successful lives beyond our school, their schooling here with us. And if we can't do it successfully and pass budgets in our current configuration, then ultimately we're going to have to think a little bit outside of the box and realize that just because this is how we've always done it, it may be time for fresh eyes, fresh ideas, thinking outside the box, envisioning, what do 21st century learning environments that provide awesome opportunities for our students look like, and what does the community want to see for their students, and even if you don't have students in the schools, the success of our students affects the success of the entire community and the region and the state ultimately. So these are tough times that we're in. And I don't think we can just kind of stay stuck in the same well-worn pathways if we're not having the successes that we need, budget-wise and opportunity-wise for our students. So this would be great to start pulling people into some of these conversations. I mean, and hopefully, I think my hope too would be that this helps us, at least for this budget cycle. Like, we're not going to be able to move the needle too much in this present budget that we're starting to work on. And so, because we are already at the bottom of that chart, I mean, spending just a little bit more than systems that don't even operate brick and mortar schools, right? So my hope is that if we start this kind of engagement now, that we might actually get people to understand the importance of kind of working with us to pass these budgets this time, while we're also engaging in really forward-thinking conversations, some of which may be hard if we have to start looking at how we configure and deliver education to all the 1,931 students across the system. That if we can make it a more of a community effort, that we can kind of get some good ideas.
We can definitely at least gauge what are the priorities.
Yeah.
What does the community want us to do? Like, we're not gonna be able to cut enough to drive the tax rates down even lower than they are. And if we continue to cut, we're trying to get our students closer to being able to be proficient in what those outcomes are, and it moves us further away from that opportunity when we have to do that. I just want to say, I'm super proud of some of the work that we're doing here at FNESU, and we hear regularly from others, leave and come back, or from other systems that know what we're working on, that they want to hear more about what we're doing. And so I feel like we're doing a lot with a little, and just would be great to not have to dig so deep to find those opportunities that we can provide for our students. I heard your question about the how Vermont compares in terms of academic proficiency. I'll bring that back. I'll also bring back that on the previous slide where I was talking about the class size and how does that connect with all of those, and again, I'll do that for the October 1 numbers. Is there other data from any of I tried to lay out all of the things that really have to be thought about in all of the realms. Is there other data that you want me to bring?
I would like to understand, I've read a few articles that say that there's a false assumption that smaller class sizes produce better learning outcomes, but that doesn't seem to be categorically true across the board. So it would be interesting to see, what does the data say? I mean, I assume that those ed quality standards are based on some of that data, but they wouldn't put out these kind of recommended class sizes if those were not kind of class size configurations that are successful for learners.
I can bring back some research on that, and I will say, if you go to the PICA study that's linked, when it makes the recommendations around size, it does reference particular studies related to where those recommendations came from. So I'll bring back some research.
And also, I think it would be interesting to get some information historically about our system and how it's changed over the years and how that's impacted our performance.
When you say how it's changed, are you talking about governance, school configurations?
School configuration, class sizes, et cetera, and the correlation between that and academic performance.
That's gonna be a little hard.
I can imagine, yeah.
We didn't have a data system that we're gonna be able to, there's nothing digital that I can go back and try to find.
Okay.
So I don't know how far back I can go.
Right.
It might be able to be something that you could pull off from the agency. We wouldn't have had a system here that would have captured that historical data.
And you know, one thing that would be really interesting, especially if you start pulling in some community engagement in the conversation, and like I'm gonna put my kind of parent cap on for just a minute, that, you know, I can say for having had 3 kids go through really tiny, a very small school, with really small class sizes, that it can be hard in a small class size of, say, 7, if your child has a hard time connecting or being kind of befriending other students, and can sometimes get kind of lost on the outside in a really small class size. So I have some of those from having watched my kids go through really small, a small school with really small class sizes, so if you have a falling out with someone, there's like not a lot of other people to kind of lean on. And so I just am curious what other people in the community find for their kids. It was more noticeable and problematic, I think, older grades than the younger grades, but also small sports teams not having the opportunity to even field a team potentially, but we have solved that by kind of combining certain schools and stuff. But some of those pieces, I'm interested to hear if other parents have found some of those, the challenges of having really small classes with their kids.
I just totally agree with that, Mary, and I think it's created other inequities when you talk about sports. I mean, this year, for example, my son is on a 6, 7, 8 soccer team. I think just because they have needed the numbers and he didn't want to play anymore because now he's the youngest, and it's intimidating when you're 11 and you're playing with almost 14-year-olds. So it's like the inequity goes in so many different directions. And I just have one other comment on the, how that relates to the school choice. I think this is going to be an unpopular opinion, but I think that school choice is very inequitable because mostly people that can make those choices have the supports at home to be able to get to those schools, and it's just kind of made it so that our high schools here locally are missing out on those funds, and it just feels like we're operating at bare minimum there. Well, I mean, district-wide and SU-wide, we obviously are, but with all that money going out to the other high schools, it's not building up our own programs. So that's what I'm also looking at as a parent as well.
Would there be a board member or two that would help me to engage in some thinking about a structure for engaging the community to try? I think, like we engage in a classroom, if we just go set something up so people can all talk one at a time, you don't actually capture all of their thoughts. So the thinking about how we can facilitate a process that would get people talking with one another, capturing their thinking and their thoughts about particular topics, and then interacting with other people's ideas and giving feedback. So is there maybe a board member or two that want to do some thinking with me on that?
Yeah, I would be interested.
Yeah, I'd be happy to participate as well then.
Great, thank you. That is almost all I have for you. Are we ready to move on from this topic?
Just encourage board members to download the PICUS report and at least read the introduction and skim through it. For those that remember last year, Act 183 started with a recommendation that basically this funding system be implemented for this year, even though this report wasn't public yet. And that was one of the reasons that things got pushed and changed into the study committee. But it seems clear to me that this is on a fast track in Vermont, and it would move us all to know what's coming.
So are you suggesting, Morgan, that out of the PICUS report could come mandates
Yes.
from the state based on the findings of the PICUS report that kind of begin to kind of mandate things around class, like school numbers, configurations, these just right, ideal school size mandates?
I mean, who knows what they'll latch onto, but there's a lot embedded in there about recommendations for strong evidence-based practices and recommendations for how you decide how many staff per student each building gets in what category. So it really goes into great detail, and again, it relies on an evidence base for each of those recommendations. So some of that is, Morgan and I tend to not be the wait and see people. We tend to be, we see this coming, let's get ahead, start modeling what that impact will look like for us. And I know, I'll just be frank, sometimes we freak people out with our thinking and our trying to get ahead of these things. And I know this is uncomfortable. This is uncomfortable for everyone that is interacting with it. But the feeling that we get of that discomfort is not enough for us to stop doing the real work of looking at all of it. I mean, like I said earlier, our data is our data, and we have to own it, and we have to think about where we go from there.
Well, as the late great Howard Zinn said, you can't be neutral on a moving train. And so, with all these issues that we are contending with, and taking it really seriously, and then looking at how it might affect how we are delivering education, and being ahead of the game so we aren't scrambling to catch up is wise.
That's our strategy.
Even if it means having some difficult and hard conversations. I mean, we went through such a difficult budget cycle. The conversation started when budgets started failing. The link, will you provide? I don't see it, so
I'll share all that with you.
that'd be great. Okay.
Second to last thing I have is about the VSBA resolutions. So I sent the resolution document out to you each year. It's typically at the VSBA Fall Conference, which is next Thursday, Friday, I believe. Typically they have a VSBA meeting that talks about each of these resolutions. They changed it this year. So there's actually a virtual meeting tomorrow night at 6 o'clock. And at that meeting, members are going to be asked to vote on resolutions. It's incredibly short notice. We somehow missed this, that it was decoupled from the proxy that you gave for the annual meetings. So we're wondering if there's a member that is able to jump on tomorrow at 6 p.m. if the board would consider appointing that person as the delegate for FNESU for the annual business meeting.
I will be at work. I'm the proxy for VSBIT and VHI at the actual conference, but I won't be able to make this one. The VSBA one needs to be a board member. We can't give it to you or Morgan, correct?
I have done that, if I can't tomorrow, presenting in a class, but we also could give it to the VSBA board, right? Was that one of the options still?
It probably is. I didn't get this proxy
Review
as soon as it got
available
to me.
tomorrow.
Yeah, I was just looking at my calendar, and I think I am, so I can actually jump on and do it,
Okay,
Great.
yes.
so you wanna make a motion?
Sure, so I'll make the motion for Akua to be the FNESU voting delegate for the annual business meeting tomorrow virtually at 6 p.m. We'll do that by roll. Kat,
Aye.
Sarah,
Aye.
Akua,
Aye.
and Mary's an aye.
Assuming there's like an invite or something that will,
Yes, we'll get you something. I'm not sure how yet, but we can figure it out.
my calendar for my own.
The link that went to the proxies, there were only a few on that first page. When you look through the proxies, is there any discussion that any board members want to have so that you can give a cool feedback about things you'd like her to consider as she's asked to vote on these resolutions?
Where, I haven't even seen the resolutions.
They're in your agenda, not in your agenda, I'm sorry.
Oh,
In
here
my
we
board
go, I
report,
see
they
that
were
link.
linked.
It says here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that wasn't maybe as clear as it could have been.
Okay.
Sorry about
There you
that.
go, sorry.
Wait. Is this something, Lynn, that you would want us to go through resolution by resolution right
I wasn't
now?
thinking you needed to, it doesn't appear to be anything major
Yeah,
that's on there. If you feel like you want to as a board, you can, or you could trust Akua
Mm-hmm.
to give the feedback that on behalf of the board that she feels is right.
if we have a little time tomorrow, to read through and then
Just shoot her an
I'll just share in an email, but just not
Right,
the whole board.
don't CC anyone else.
Okay.
Any business. You should
Okay,
individually give her information.
sure.
So
I mean, I
that-
feel as though generally historically, we've largely kind of gone with what the VSBA recommendation is.
Correct.
I can't think of maybe a handful of
Right.
ones where we,
It's been really rare to go against.
yeah. Okay,
That's it for me until the very end.
until executive session.
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you.
When,
What was that, Kat?
sorry, I just had one question for Lynn. The meeting that Secretary Saunders is coming to at Enosburg High School, so that is open to like any community member?
From any communities all over Vermont. Anybody can go, staff members, parents, community members, it's wide open. It's really.
Okay, so is that something that we would like let our communities know, like put it in the newsletters or put out an email? I just think kind of back to getting the community engaged, if they have the opportunity to go and listen to her, I mean, even if some people go, you know, and it's coming right from the horse's mouth, like, you know, potentially just some information that could help them begin to understand, you know, just a lot of things. So just getting the word out, I think would be really awesome.
Courtney is working on that, the final details for that, I think gave it an email this afternoon. So she's gonna work on getting something out for all schools to share. She's gonna post it on Front Porch Forum. She's gonna share it with the other supervisory unions or districts around us. And she will post that on all of our Facebook pages.
Okay, great. All right, so moving on to our reports, Dominic?
Nothing too exciting to share this time, but getting ready to do our state reports, our fall state reports. That's something that usually takes a pretty big chunk of my time, a couple different times a year. And just, the AOE is rolling out a new system this year, which thankfully. With the old system, would generate 21 spreadsheets of data, some of them with tens of thousands of rows of data submitted to the system. Wait sometimes 10, 12 hours to get your reports back to let you know if there were any errors, it checks the sheets against each other and against other schools, and then make corrections, resubmit, and repeat that process. So with the new system, they'll take the requirement to download and generate reports and submit them, that'll all be gone, and now it all happens electronically right from our school and right into their systems. So it should be quite a big time saver moving forward, although we're a few weeks from the first submission and they don't have all the bugs worked out yet, so we'll see how this first year goes. And the only other thing I wanted to mention is just a reminder that we do have two-factor authentication available, and Courtney linked the instructions there again in case anyone missed the email with those instructions. We now have that mandated for all employees. I didn't make that a change for board members, but you don't use your FNESU Google accounts as often as all the employees do. But you do have that all the same options that employees do.
Okay. Great, thank you. Gab?
I don't have much to add. It seemed like there wasn't very much space in between meetings, and it was really hard to think of what we should tell you. But I just want to point to the website that kind of highlights what we have been working on for professional learning during SU and service days, if you want to explore that. The way that happened was that we took the board goals and we kind of synthesized what are the big ideas, the big learnings, and that's lives on the website now. So on the front page there's a general schedule, but then on the left-hand side are sort of the topics that people are exploring and learning about and working on. So if you want to see what we've been doing during those service days, that is available for you.
Great, thanks, Gab. Michelle?
So every year we apply for what's called an IDEA B grant, which is a federal grant for special education. And and every year we have to show that we are maintaining local spending in special education. And this year we really struggled to reach the maintenance of effort. And it's because I'm spending way less in special education. So I feel like we're doing good things, but it's kind of.
I think the major cost drivers that we saw in years past were alternative programs, contracted service providers, through mental health agencies, and that transportation. And we were talking millions to address that, and we're not talking millions. I don't think we're providing less service, we're doing it in a different way. So it isn't, we're not doing this to be a cost saver, it's just the way we're operating is just the structure is much different.
And I'm curious then, do we have, from the mental health perspective, do we have in-house mental health practitioners or are those still services that we're largely contracting out for?
So then, you go ahead. I'm going to start.
It's both. So
Yeah.
there are, like in the STEPS program, we have our own staff member that is a clinician that's working there, but then there's some schools that still contract with NCSS for a school-based clinician.
Yeah.
And then
It's very hard to get those contracts. So
I'm
sometimes
sure.
it's not even that we're saying we don't want them, we would like them, but they don't have the staff to be able to
Right.
fulfill more contracts.
like Richard has their own, there's different people.
Right.
The high school. Depends, the high school, yeah. Yep, little both.
You're good, Michelle?
Yep, sorry.
Okay, thank you so much. Heather?
Not too much more to add. I am excited to say that on October 24th, the Agency of Education is having a celebration of student learning. And one of our,
Not the agency,
not the agency.
Vermont Superintendent Association and School Boards Association.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. I think I've been telling myself the wrong thing, but anyway, but it's a statewide celebration of student learning, and it's also the National Lights On After School Day. So I'm really excited. It's the same day, and we're having a LEAPS student along with Richford Junior Senior High School staff attend that, and they're going to give a little presentation, and we're going to highlight all of the programs in a visual way for with some documentation in case people want to know more about our whole FNESU programs. But this particular student is a student that has gone through a lot of our programs and is part of the Vermont Youth Project and is an employee of ours. So they'll also be talking about how our programs provide job training opportunities and transferable life skills, and just like and helping them to bring interests and excitements of theirs out into the school community to make improvements for the whole school community and out into the greater community and do other projects as well. So it's pretty, it's a fun little presentation that they're going to be offering. I'm really excited about that. And that student's going to go to the after school conference the next day, and from after school actually opened up a special spot for him. So it's going to continue. He said, one of the things he said was, it's so amazing to have a job as a high school student that lets you go to conferences and be a leader. So I'm happy to be able to share this with the rest of the state.
That's awesome. That's very cool. Great, thank you so much. Jamie?
I also don't have much to add because I feel like we've been here 2 weeks ago. But we did hire 3 additional professionals and 4 support staff since the last meeting. We also had 1 professional and 2 support staff resign, so we're a little ahead of the game there. And we only have 3 current vacancies that we're advertising for the professional side, and just a few support staff remaining. So again, I say this the last couple of meetings, we're doing really well staffing wise. And that's about it.
Thank you. Dawn?
So we have started this year running a 6-week cycle menu, and it's going by seasons. So right now we're running that fall cycle menu, and something that's coming along on that cycle menu is a lot of the veggies. We're roasting those veggies, opening kids' eyes up to roasted veggies, and it's a hit and miss. For the most part, they're really liking them and enjoying them. So we're changing and trying to do different things.
That's great. Thank you. Melissa?
I had written about our focus on digging into early childhood development through the various domains. And through our recent in-service, we had invited our occupational therapist to talk about sensory needs, because that's an identified uptick of needs within our youngest learners. So we're really working on digging into, like, looking at the children's needs, matching it with professional learning, and using that to build up our middle tier, so our tier 2 interventions and supports before it gets to special ed, because a lot of it isn't special ed. It's just we're seeing more children with a higher level of need that needs to be addressed, that really starts in utero and in infancy with with children, that we're just seeing it as they develop. So in order for them to sit at a circle in kindergarten and be ready to read and write, we need to kind of catch and support some of these needs early on, and that's what our professional learning is focused on this year.
Great, thank you so much. Vern?
Again, same as everybody else, we were here a couple weeks ago, but I'm real hopeful, but the next time we meet, I'll be able to tell you that we have a up and running heat plant at Richford High School. We're getting real close up there. It's been a haul. It's been a project. We started this my first year, so it's been a haul. And just kind of keeping things going, patching the parking lot over at the high school, Enosburg High School. We're gonna lose a Chevy there pretty quick. And Cold Hollow Career Center, replacing some of those vintage 1980 bathrooms and making them a little bit more updated. So we're just nipping away some projects.
Great.
Yeah, I think it's worth noting that you shared some information with me today, because I requested it, that how much money you were able to pull in for that heating project. So in Richmond, that project bid was $525,000. You received $250,000 from a Vermont heat grant, $60,000 from Efficiency Vermont. So you took that from a $525,000 project down to a $215,000 project.
Yeah.
Which is pretty amazing.
I'm hoping to be able to give some numbers after a year cycle with that to see what we're saving versus what we're doing in programming as well, so.
With the fuel cost savings, yeah.
Yeah.
Because those can access more of a local renewable resource, correct, for the
Yes.
heating fuel,
Yeah.
the pellets, and support local businesses that way. That's great. All right, thank you, everyone. I know we have an executive session to move into, so I'll make that motion and we'll let everyone who isn't joining leave. So I'll make a motion to enter executive by roll. Kat?
Aye.
Sarah?
Aye.
Akua?
Aye.
And Mary is an aye. We are out of executive.
Being recorded.
We're out of executive at 8:52 with no motion or action pending. Any other discussion tonight, folks? Okay, well, I'll make a motion to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Great, all right, thank you so much, folks.